Is social justice inherently political? Do politics have a place at camp? What if we took it back to our why? Why are we doing these things? Or why are we holding these values? And place campers at the center of our work. This work isn't easy. It can be messy and we can stumble. Join us as we chat with Laura and Klee about how we can create spaces at camp for challenging discussions that welcome all viewpoints as we teach our campers how to listen and understand with radical empathy.
Before we get started with today's show, we've been talking a lot about how we're feeling and topics that we find interesting and important. We want to know about what you're going through. How are you feeling, really feeling, or topics you would like to hear more about? You can send your thoughts to beyondcamp@gocamp.pro, and we'll add it to our brainstorming session for season 3 to start fall of 2021.
Welcome to Beyond Camp, where we explore the intersection of camp in our lives. For too long, camp professionals have referred to camp as being in a bubble, and we're here to burst that bubble with you. We know that camp intersects with every aspect of our lives, and we're excited to delve into those. We are your hosts, Rachel Kent. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Cassie Bloy. My pronouns are also she, her.
And we're here to go beyond camp with you. As a reminder, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening today, and be sure to check out the show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. Now, let's get started. Today, we're chatting with Laura and Klee from Stomping Ground about social justice, camp, and politics, topics that can be tricky and challenging for us to engage with, so we're excited to dive in. Allison Klee wears a ton of different hats at Stomping Ground. While overseeing parent communications, managing social media, content, and marketing, her connection to their camper base is always kept as a top priority. With infallible determination and a deep love for her community, she spends her time coming up with new ways to bring people together and advancing the camp industry to the standards she envisions. This year, she's hosted the Inspiring Radical Empathy podcast, pioneered Stomping Ground's virtual hometown Stomping Ground, and created a forum to drive what she believes is the most important at camp through facilitating restorative justice trainings. Klee's also going to begin working on her Master of Social Work this fall, which is very exciting. Klee, we're so happy to have you here.
Thanks. So grateful to be here. Excited to talk with you all.
Fabulous. And then we also have Laura, whose commitments to equity and inclusivity at Stomping Ground are a direct result of her passion and constant work for creating spaces she knows the world needs more of. Laura's creativity and background as an artist is felt by everyone who steps foot on camp and informs their program and their new forever home outside of Saratoga Springs in all aspects. She's a recent graduate of the Master's in Social Work program at Columbia University, and Laura shares her devotion to the correction of social issues with the larger camp community by being a thought leader and facilitating trainings on restorative justice. Laura, we're so excited to have you as well.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. Cassie, I'll pass it over to you to get started.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited for this conversation today. But before we really dive in, we always like to start off learning about and talking about our identities and the privilege that we carry with them. So if one of which you would like to kick us off with some of those identities that you have or carry and the privilege that you feel or carry with them.
Okay, I'll share first. I am a white cisgender female identifying person, and or a woman, and I have some class privilege as well. I grew up in a middle class family in upstate New York and outside of Rochester, and I think another privilege that I hold that I was thinking about today is the privilege of working for myself and working for camp. I think that camp affords us all kinds of creativity and flexibility in our jobs, and I feel privileged to have an organization that I feel passionate about working for. It's a big privilege.
Nice. Thanks for front loading this. Always important on a podcast where you might just be listening to people talk. I am also identifying as a white cisgender female. I think I certainly hold class privilege as well. I grew up in a pretty affluent neighborhood, attended a school with people in certain or same class as me as well. And like Laura, I certainly feel privileged to have had job stability since going to college, a privilege as well, and continuing to further my education. Like Rachel mentioned in my bio, I'm looking forward to getting my master's and grateful for that opportunity.
Thanks so much for sharing those. One of the reasons why we've really tried to include that in our podcast is we think it's important language that we start to essentially normalize and have be part of our conversations and not just conversations around social justice. So thank you both for sharing those. On that note, social justice is a hot button issue these days. You see it everywhere, and camp is no different. I'm curious, Laura, how does social justice present itself at your camp?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Rachel. I think a lot of what you said is true. Like, camp is a little microcosm of the world, and I love the kind of way y'all talk about bursting the bubble of camp. Like, let's bring all of the stuff that we interact with in the real world into our camp world, because it's essentially a place where we can uh, rethink or reimagine what the outside world could be like. But we aren't going to get rid of all that stuff that we interact with in the quote unquote real world. So I think at camp we have an awesome opportunity to re-inspire kids and staff to think about different possibilities and innovative ways to solve problems and build connection with each other. And it's really a human connection place. That's what we do at camp. We create relationships with each other and a connection to a community, a sense of belonging. And everybody who comes to Stomping Ground, we hope feels that sense of belonging, just like so many thousands of camps that are out there want to create that sense of belonging with their campers. And so for us, I think the intersection of camp and social justice is essentially that. It's like having all the folks who we want to feel a sense of belonging in our program, communicating to them that they have a space with us, that we see them and all the identities and facets of their life that they bring to camp, and that they're welcome and included and belong in our space.
I love how you phrase that because it feels gentle and welcoming to me. And I think sometimes social justice, it has a place for it to be really edgy and aggressive, enthusiastic, in your face. But I think sometimes that can get some pushback from folks, and people don't understand how it plays out in day-to-day life. They're like, social justice is, on Instagram, TikTok, and protests, and it isn't in my like day-to-day average white person life oftentimes. So I really appreciate how you phrase that. Does that align with your perspective on things? Do you have anything else to add on that? I know Laura did a really great job highlighting that.
Yeah, I think something else I'm thinking about is that when I want to share a little bit about what this might look like actually at camp to give folks a sense of understanding. And I think when it comes to communication with campers who may be interested in discussing social justice issues, currently in our programming, this isn't anything that we force any campers to be a part of. All programming at Stomping Ground is choice-based. And I think when Laura and I were chatting about how these things might come up at Stomping Ground, I was thinking about it in the sense that it's a little bit similar how we train or talk up to our staff about how to prepare for situations where kids might ask questions about other sensitive topics like relationships or things like that. When campers ask us these questions, it's probably a sign that they feel really comfortable and safe with the person they're asking. And I think that that's a superpower that we have as camp staff. And so when kids bring up any questions or thoughts on social justice or politics, I think it's important not to shame kids and that our staff know it's not their role to indoctrinate or share their beliefs with campers, but rather to listen and validate, just like our camp staff are trained to do in so many other situations, whether it be homesickness or conflict or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm really liking how it's just so well-rounded and kind of all-encompassing of values and people as a whole versus parts of them. But as I'm thinking about social justice and all the ways we interact with it, quite often people see social justice as politics. And I want to make sure we're really clear in how I don't think that's how the four of us sitting here see it, as they're separate entities and they all have different things. So how do you see social justice and politics kind of intermingling or differing? Klee, I'm going to shoot to you first.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this question since you've brought it up in our initial conversation. I think that so many times, like you said, politics has a pretty negative connotation. We think about politics as being divisive between family and friends. I think in really close relationships, it can sometimes drive people apart. I know I've had my fair share of difficult conversations with loved ones this year around politics, and that can be really challenging. So I guess in short, do I think it always means getting political? No. I think I know at Stomping Ground, our mission is to inspire the next generation of radically empathetic decision makers. So for us, that means thinking, how do we help kids and provide them with opportunities to find radically empathetic responses to conversations or situations that may come up in their own lives, whether that be at camp or outside of camp, when it comes to talking and thinking with others about politics and social justice.
Ugh, I don't know how to respond because I just have like this like tingling sensation happening of like, that just sounded so amazing that it was just like, oh, all of these things, and we're going to do this so that these kids have the tools they need to succeed or have
Yeah.
the conversations later.
And not to say that it's not still messy. Maybe that sounded
Yeah.
a little bit too picture perfect. I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's super hard and a skill to have radically empathetic conversations,
Yeah.
and we make a bunch of mistakes and try to get better.
That's the one way we learn how to move forward. To fail is our first attempt at learning.
I think one of the things is that politics doesn't often allow space for mistakes, ever, I would argue, um, especially with the role of social media these days. Laura, do you think politics have any role at camp at all?
Great question. I'm reeling from Klee's answer as well. I think that was well put. I think there's like, I think that it's really interesting. Like when we say politics, everybody kind of squirms and gets all uncomfortable, and they feel like, oh no, I'm going to be asked my opinion and what side I'm on, and I'm going to have to defend myself, or, and I think that that's the divisive nature of politics, and it is. Personally, I think like thinking about the difference between social justice topics and politics. I don't like that it's part of the same conversation. I'd like to figure out how to continue to separate that, because I think what we're really talking about is humanity and dignity, and the dignity that we can give all the people who come and interact with us in our space. So I think I think I'm with Klee. There's like, we're not there are no activities or opportunities for staff to really like share their own political view in an effort to change campers' minds, but recognize that each camper and staff come to camp with a series of things in their life that have shaped who they are and what they believe, and we can validate and trust those things, and then respond accordingly. So I think that's my stance on it. Do I think politics have a place at camp? I don't think that we can avoid politics at camp, but I don't think that we. I think that the thing that I'm more interested in is how can we take away some of that divisive language and focus on like the human beings that are affected by whatever those political questions that might come up are. I was listening to a podcast by Brene Brown the other day, and I love Brene Brown, and I'm always inspired, and light bulbs are going off in my head. I'm often thinking while I'm driving, like, I wish there was some way to like have post-it notes on my steering wheel so I could like jot things down, but that would probably be very dangerous. So I haven't done it yet, but I'm always like, how do I capture this thing while I'm listening to it on the car? Someday somebody will invent something that you can like maybe connect your brain to the thing you're listening to. There's something there, but I think there's what she talked about in her podcast. It was a podcast that aired right after the riots on the Capitol. And she said, everybody stop, and I'm going to butcher her words here, but we can maybe link to it in the show notes. I don't know. But she talks about how language can be really dehumanizing, and that is what happens when we start to see political viewpoints as movements and not really based in like how they affect human beings. And so everybody on all the political sides with all the political opinions, stop with the dehumanizing language. Let's figure out how to like rehumanize what's actually happening and think about the effect that it's having on real human lives. And so I think that that's been my thought lately about this is like, how can we reintroduce humanity into some of these conversations and make them more about the actual people that are being affected?
I really like that because at camp we have this opportunity to live with people who we may not interact with on a daily basis. And oftentimes we can knock down some of the preconceived notions that we might have about those folks as well. Because often, especially for kids, their viewpoints are the viewpoints of what's being shared around them. And we can each live in our own little bubble, essentially. But when we come to camp and we all live in a cabin group or in a tent together, we get a chance to interact beyond those bubbles with people who we may not typically chat with, which I think is really fabulous. There's been a phrase that's been kicking around on Facebook, so you know that this is going to go well when I start with that. But I'm one of the moderators of the Summer Camp Pros Facebook group. And whenever folks start to bring up social justice issues, there's always somebody who says, politics don't belong at camp. And so from what I hear you're saying, it's not a place for us to be holding rallies for certain political folks or anything like that. But how do you address that? Or have you come across that when people start to say politics don't belong at camp when you are trying to go down the road of social justice versus politics? And Cleo, I think I'll pass it to you first.
Yeah, I got a few things floating around in my head here. The first one is I think I would ask or let them know that I have a concern that would be, okay, so what's like the game plan if politics do come up at camp? I think that there are many situations where that happens, and I have a concern that if a response to a camper or a staff member who suggested a viewpoint or a question, however it came up, had something to say that was political and the response was politics don't belong at camp, I have a concern that that can be shameful in certain situations, which I think we mentioned in the beginning. How can we instead validate and listen without having to share our own beliefs or make people feel like they have to think any certain way? Is there space for listening and validating without shutting that down immediately? I think it's also important to think about how, depending on your identity and the privilege that you hold, it might be easier or more difficult for you to escape politics, as our identities and politics are connected. And so I think that is at play also.
Absolutely. I know as a queer person, I often feel like it's a privilege to say I'm not going to be political right now because my right to get married has been hotly debated in recent memory, whereas a straight person's may not have. And that's just one
Right.
facet of that. But I know that's always resonated deeply with me. Before we head to our ad break, Laura, did you have anything else to add to Clee's well put together thought on that?
That was a well put together thought. I just want to underline something she said. I think that that it is a privilege to avoid political conversations for sure, but that also there's often a, I think, and I'm going to get the wrong words here, so Clee, correct me, but I'm thinking about cancel culture and how often sometimes that is very shame based, and it infiltrates some of the good work that I think we do when we talk about social justice and giving voice to marginalized populations, or creating a sense of belonging within different communities. I think that trying to figure out how to heal harm, mitigate future harm, and build community is much more about like transforming those conversations and learning through those conversations rather than canceling those conversations.
Absolutely. There's not a lot of politics that involves listening, unfortunately. And I think camp is a fabulous place to reintroduce that and the idea of listening to folks.
That's right.
So thank you for sharing that. Sorry, Clea, did you have something else you wanted to add on there?
Yeah, I think that in an ideal community also, there's enough trust built where folks can say, if they're a part of a political conversation or they hear about it and folks might start to talk about it, there's trust built to be like, I'm out, I'm not feeling this right now, I don't really want to talk about it, and it's consent based too.
I love that. Consent is so important in everything that we do, whether it be conversation and something verbal or something physical as well. So thank you so much for highlighting that again. We're going to take a short break here, and then we'll be right back to dive further into this conversation. So stay tuned, everyone.
ACA Illinois loves to try new things and believes it's how we create the most dynamic impact for our campers, staff, and community. This is why ACA Illinois always jumps at the chance to collaborate with content experts and countless volunteers to develop new and innovative programming. Camp directors love to dream big, and ACA Illinois is here to support them. The Women in Camp Summit is a great example of this. A new and innovative volunteer-led program needed support, and ACA Illinois stepped in. Rachel and I both can't recommend this highly enough. It's an incredible example of ACA Illinois backing a grassroots movement. They are ready to support content experts who are providing cutting-edge training to camp directors at conferences and trainings, including Michael Brandewine's Super Seminar for Dynamic Camp Leadership. I would highly recommend this to anyone looking to change up how they lead and teach leadership to their staff. If you have attended a conference session of his, you would likely agree that there could not be a better person to teach how to lead by example. When the pandemic hit and new and innovative ways of training and reaching camp professionals were needed, ACA Illinois led the way, helping the Women in Camp Summit go virtual and hosting numerous online trainings, webinars, and more. The pandemic called for innovative in a brand new way, and Illinois did not back down from the challenge. Ready to help them achieve this mission? Join them at acail.org to find out more information and be a part of creating new opportunities for camp pros. All right, we're going to dive right back into this and keep talking about the hard stuff that needs to be talked about a little bit more. So let's start with Laura on this one. How do you deal with differences in political outlooks or perspectives on social justice issues between campers?
I think it's essentially what we've really been focusing on or talking about. It's like, how do we actively listen and validate where folks are coming from? How do we hear? That's the act of radical empathy, is like taking a little bit more time, an extended amount of time, and extending graciously extending your time to understand, or to spend more time trying to understand where another person might be coming from. So I think the way that we do that at Stomping Ground, we have some systems in place to build community, as well as address and collaboratively solve problems that might come up. We also talk about how at camp and in a lot of communities, conflict is a natural and normal part about living together and working together, and that conflict is an opportunity for innovation and connection. We often are really scared of conflict. It is something that our society as a whole is afraid of, but it creates more disconnection and division rather than connection. But if we can flip the script on that, when working with kids and working with ourselves, which takes a lot of energy. I think that I personally don't have like I don't run into conflict thinking this is exactly where my mind and my heart want to be right now, but if we can start to really think about to see conflict as that opportunity, I think there's a lot of possibility in that to connect and find, get to the root of what's really so threatening about some of our differences, and that's really the work of one, creating a sense of belonging, and two, redefining what justice means.
I like that. So I'm just trying to like envision this with some of my past campers and those conversations that I might have had. How do you give staff, I'm going to direct this one more to Klee, but how do you give the staff the tools to actually have these conversations? Like, how do you help them learn to actively listen, especially some of those younger staff who are first time working in camp or never attended camp, but you're like, this person's going to kick butt at this if they can get all this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's step one, is telling them you're going to kick butt and we hired you for a reason and you got this and you're a people person and you're good at listening. And that's what this comes back to, right? The humanitarian piece, just having the skills to listen and be empathetic, which so many camp staff have. I think even if they're new, it's probably a skill that comes naturally to them. And we probably picked up on it in the interview process or when meeting them. And I think that is step one, empowering them and encouraging them to know that they are the right people to have these conversations. And it really just comes back to building trust with campers.
Trust is always key. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, definitely. And I think also letting them know that they have a support system in place on staff so that if they are confronted with a conversation or a situation that they're unsure about, they know they have other people on staff to call on and help them have those conversations, or just systems in place to debrief a conversation that they're not sure if they did a good job or how it went. I know I've definitely had to do that a lot with Laura and other people on staff, to be like, let me just debrief this difficult conversation I had and kind of check myself and make sure I did okay and that I see if there's anyone else I need to check in with. I think that that's a cool superpower that we have on camp staff as well, is we tend to be really tight-knit, close coworkers, which is really special about being on camp staff.
Absolutely. I always used to say to my staff, you know, if a camper brings up something that you're not sure how to talk about, you can always say, wow, it's really interesting that you want to talk about this. Let me find somebody who like is really passionate about this or like really interested. And that also sort of gives that staff member consent as well in that conversation, because depending on what the topic is, if that's their lived experience and the camper doesn't know that, that could be a really challenging thing to have to witness or to be there for. So I think giving them that out as well, to be like, the camp is prepared to hold these conversations and we'll also make sure that you're consenting to having those. I think that's fun. Laura, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I love that. I really, it's making me think about how kind of all the ways that we talk to staff and kind of connect our theory come out to play in the day to day and in all kinds of conversations that we have, but especially when things feel heavy or like feel like hard work. So I think Klee, I heard you mention two things that we talk a lot about at camp. One is partnering with kids and thinking about how to build a sense of community by not powering over, but partnering with them through these conversations. I think we really build trust in that way. And I forgot the second thing I was thinking.
Well, if it comes back to you, let us know and we'll pop back to that. So often as camp pros, I would say always, we have our own individual views of things. And then we work for organizations that also have views. And sometimes they're strong views, sometimes the views directly align with ours, and sometimes they might differ a little bit. And I think sometimes we can have some bias in hiring folks who have the same perspective or outlook at us. But Lee, I'll pass to you first. Do people need to share the same perspective or outlook to work at your camp? How do you address that if that comes up as a question?
No, people do not need to share the same perspective or outlook to work at Stomping Ground. I think just like all of our campers and their families don't share the same perspective and outlook, we do our best to make sure that our staff is diverse as well. And we want our campers to be able to relate to our staff. And therefore, we want to have a diverse staff as well with all different perspectives and outlooks.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that that's really important as well, especially when you're drawing kids from a variety of different walks of life. Um, Laura, is that something that you've ever been like really bold when you've been hiring staff, that you're looking for different perspectives? Do you find that folks tend to come to Stomping Ground that have similar perspectives?
Your question is how when we're looking for staff, do we advertise that we're looking for different folks to bring a diverse viewpoints onto the team? Yeah, I would say that that's part of the way we present the job to folks. I would say that the majority of people who find a job through Stomping Ground find us through word of mouth, and that speaks volumes to like some people bring people that they're connected with, but have kind of shared that that's like a value that we hold as a community is accepting and sharing power with people who have maybe different ideas from the ones we do. But I also think our website kind of says join the team and share and like help shape camp. And so I hope that also communicates that we're looking for people who'll join us and use and know that their voice could change how we do things.
I really like that almost gives them like a sense of autonomy to still know that they're themselves when they're at camp, and they don't have to change who they are to be at camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's not only for campers, but for kids as well, that's so important that they know that they're important, that they matter. But as I think about it, it's also kind of helping me think about, okay, so we have these typically certain areas that we pull our camper populations from, right? And it's usually somewhat stable in a certain way of like who attends your camp from a certain geographical area or what have you. But there's still diversity within that. So how can camps go about expanding their population, but still maintaining their stance on social justice issues? Yeah,
Your question,
ahead, Laura.
Yeah, your question is how do we recruit campers?
Yeah.
To I think maybe something you're getting at too is like, and I was trying to look up and remember the exact definition as we were talking, but I think we're kind of talking about something called contact hypothesis or intergroup contact theory, which is the idea that under appropriate conditions, people from majority groups and minority groups can under the appropriate conditions, we can effectively reduce prejudice between those groups and create more of a connection and understanding of each other. And so that's the reason why we'd want to have different people join us at camp. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you're saying, how do we find people from that way?
How do you make that happen so that you have that more diverse camper population, but still maintain your social justice stance?
I think that I need to pause and think for a second.
I have one thought.
Yeah.
I think part of it is being willing to be transparent and have conversations with folks who might disagree with you. So if you are expanding your camper population, or perhaps your organization or camp is changing your stance or putting it forth for the first time, be open and willing to have those conversations and validate others who might say, you've never done this before, what's going on? Or can you tell us why you might have changed your stance? I think that having those conversations and letting folks know that nobody is being excluded or pushed out, we want to maintain the community of camp, is important when it comes to connecting with new camper families and maintaining a stance on any social justice issues or programmatic changes or decisions, anything like that.
I think always bringing things back to people as well is really important. So when we're going to market to new campers, let's say like we want to expand our camper population, I think from what you've sort of been saying and sort of my perspective is, instead of saying like this is our stance, just being like this is all the ways that we make all these kids feel valued and included at a camp, and this is how we talk about these things. Sounds like to me what you're doing versus I think taking a stance is a really strong wording of something and can really put some people's backs up. And sometimes once we say something that's really strongly worded and people get their backs up, sometimes we're never able to get past that and actually like engage in that meaningful conversation that can sort of force us to listen to each other and actually get somewhere on things.
I think also, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cassie, but I think you're also maybe thinking about how we intentionally recruit folks and reach out to communities with the hope of creating a dialogue and a sense of like, we care about your community and you belong in our community. And I think that historically, summer camps have been a very white space and a space that is typically very affluent. And so how do we how do we break some of those molds and help have the privilege that is afforded to people who come to summer camp. I think some of the privileges included in the summer camp deal are like a connection to other folks, and a sense of belonging and community. But also I know that for myself, I got connected to jobs through summer camp. Working at summer camp connected me with other jobs outside for the rest of the year. It connected me with a series of friends who had other like networks and connections for me. I think there's so much within the network of camp. We can give that privilege to privilege begets privilege, and so you can give that to other folks. The more folks you kind of include in the community.
Yeah,
I love that perspective because I think oftentimes, I know when I first started learning about privilege years ago, I was like, I always felt attacked. Like somebody was like, you have this privilege. And I was like, there's nothing I can do about it. But having privilege means that then you can use it for good. You can use it, you can share that platform and use that power to include more people. And I think that that's really powerful about camp. I know often camps who have great inclusive policies and such and organizations, they want to be building bridges with the communities around them. And Laura, I think you touched on this a little bit, but have you folks done any work where you've really tried to work with the communities, like physically surrounding your property?
Well, we just moved here about a year ago, and then the pandemic hit, and so our community outreach has been a little stilted by some of the current events here. But we are hoping to invite folks onto camp to do barbecue, hot dog, hamburger days, and kind of help us figure out how to take care. We're so lucky to be the next stewards of this land, and we're looking forward to partnering with community members and organizations to build some a sense of belonging for them. We want to share this place with them for sure.
That's really important because I think often where I've been located before, camps are often very wealthy, like they have a ton of money, and they're in places where like the kids from those towns could never afford to go to them, and like there just isn't that connection, and so that can create a lot of discontent between like the town and the camp and the staff and things like that. So I think building those bridges is really important and is really powerful because I think we can all agree that we think all kids need camp, regardless of where they are, where they're located. Clea, did you have anything to add to that?
I think that's been one of my favorite parts of working for Stomping Ground is learning how we partner with other communities. And I think I'm really inspired by the community partnerships that Laura has started in Rochester, where our office is based, and then New York City and Philadelphia, where we get a lot of campers. And so I'm inspired by those connections and partnerships to bring that to the Saratoga area now that we have our own site.
That's really exciting as well. And I think that's also important to know that often our offices are not located where our camps are. And so there's like that disconnect as well there.
yeah, so much. So it sounds like we've been talking about and that Stomping Ground really does a great job of integrating social justice issues into your program. What advice would each of you give to camps that are just starting their journey? Their journey in general, their journey in social justice, their journey. It's a pretty big word, but when you really think of it. Laura, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think that it goes back to something Klee said early on. It's like we don't, I think that trusting kids and trusting that and not and creating a space where they feel like they can talk through or share or think out loud with us. It's such a privilege to be able to work in a space where campers have that sense of comfort. And so it's our job as a camp community and as different camps and as camp staff to receive that, but not necessarily like react in a way that will but be aware and conscious of our reaction, because that can have a real impact on a child's understanding of the world, as well as their sense of belonging in a space. So I think that's maybe my biggest piece of advice is, this is a huge responsibility that we have as people who are connecting and learning from kids, and it's the most important thing we can do as camp professionals is to listen.
Amazing. Klee, anything to add?
I also think something I was thinking about and feeling grateful for when reading this question is being a part of the summer camp community. I think we're really good at helping one another out and sharing resources and mistakes we've made and lessons learned. And I think that's super important when it comes to integrating social justice issues into our programs. I think it's important to have a community of other camp professionals, but also professionals and friends and colleagues beyond summer camp folks to talk about these things with and learn best practices and hear what other organizations are doing, and taking all that information in and then kind of assessing the needs of our own individual communities and the people that we serve, and taking all that knowledge and that networking and continuing to try over and over to provide the best and most equitable programs to the kids that we serve.
Ultimately, what we're doing is for the kids. That's why we're doing all of these things. And I think folks get scared off by the phrasing social justice and politics. And those are big, scary words, and people get their back up, and people have preconceived notions of what those things mean. And so, Cassie, I know you didn't ask me, but I'm going to give my opinion here. I apologize. But I think oftentimes, starting by looking at what your campers need and who's not at your camp and what would they need to feel welcome. And it's not necessarily about labels, it's not about movements per se, so much as it can just be about how do we make more kids safe and welcome in our space. And perhaps that's a good starting point for folks who are just dipping their toes and are unsure of where to go next.
I would just add one more thing if I could. I really like what you
course.
said, Rachel. I think that if another piece of advice I have is, and this works for so many things at camp, is really starting from why. Like, why do you want to have more of an inclusive space? Why do you want, if you want to welcome these kinds of conversations, why do you want those things? What is the purpose of them? And I think really sitting with the people who are the decision makers in your community and figuring out why you're want to engage in some of these ideas will help give you some clarity as a community about how to then go about doing it, and to be really intentional about the why. And it can, and in my opinion, the why, we have to be really careful that the why is not to make ourselves the hero of the story or somehow make ourselves the main character of the story. It's like really important to, I think about how is the work really benefiting the people who or is it benefiting ourselves? I think that's a really key issue. Is it benefiting the campers that we serve? Is it benefiting the different staff groups? Is it benefiting different or is it something that we'd like to be involved in selfishly? I think that there's like a real important distinction there, and starting with why and really sifting through. Every time you feel like you get to an answer, if you ask why again, you'll get to a different root cause that might be more clarifying for you and your team.
Sometimes I think would I do this if I couldn't post it on Instagram? That's like
Right.
a good, like,
Yes.
this is not necessarily like something that's just really, we're just putting it out there. It's not performative, like really.
Performative is the right word. I think that we and we started off this conversation kind of talking about how these things feel like hot button issues. They feel like everybody's kind of, one-upping each other in these conversations. I'm more woke than you, that kind of thing. I think that can be really problematic because it doesn't focus on why. Why do we care? Why does it matter? And who does it serve? So I think starting from that place as as individuals, but also as decision makers in communities, will set us on the right track.
Amazing. Oh my goodness. There's just been so much just in these last few minutes at the very end of like great things to know and to listen for. And I want to take a minute to thank Laura and Klee for joining us today as we wrap up and give you just a few things that kind of popped out to me to help everyone move forward. If you take anything, please just listen first and then validate when campers have questions or staff have questions or anybody really. Build trust with your campers and your staff so you can have these open conversations and ask yourself why. Why are we doing this? You can find more information or hear Laura and Klee more often on their Inspiring Radical Empathy podcast as well. You can check them out there. And thank you again for joining us. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with the two of you today and learn and grow as well. Laura, how can our listeners get in touch with you if they want to follow up?
You can follow me on all of the social media channels at campstompingground.org or at Camp Stomping Ground. Klee manages a lot of our social media stuff. So I'm also available on, you can friend me on Facebook. I'm Laura Kriegel, or on Instagram as well.
Thank you so much. Klee, anything for you for different ways, or is the Stomping Ground handle the best one?
Yes, at Camp Stomping Ground on Instagram, on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. Find us anywhere. We love social media. It's an awesome place to get to know folks. And thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us beyond camp. We hope that you were able to connect and reflect with us as we journey beyond the property lines and bring camp with us. As we wrap up one last time, we want you to be able to reach out and connect with myself at cassie.bloy@stephanricard.ca. Rachel?
Folks are always welcome to send me an email at kentar@girlguides.ca.
Please remember to check out our show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. A final thank you to Laura and Klee for making the time to have this conversation with us today. To the team at Go Camp Pro for holding the space for us to have these conversations. To the wonderful crew at ACA Illinois for their continued sponsorship and support of this idea. To our producers, Matt and Jotham, for taking those little moments and cutting them out. And to you, our listeners, for making the time to listen. Your dedication allows us to keep moving forward. Go Camp Pro, Beyond Camp is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Check out all our other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Go well and safely, friends. We'll see you next week.